Good morning, dear friends. Today is Tuesday, the 11th of Av, the 22nd, is it? No, the 20th. I'm going backwards. The 20th, July 20th. And today we are studying Talmud, the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time, presently studying Ch6, Shabbos, chapter 6. And we are Samach Gimel Amud Beis 63B. And with Hashem's help, in just a moment, turning to 64A. The chapter of Amel Isha has been talking about items that one may and mostly may not wear on their person or carry on Shabbos. And we've gone through a whole different variety of items, some that are rabbinically prohibited, others that are biblically restricted. We just went through a whole series of items that are worn in battle and possibly in peacetime too. And that led us onto a long detour through Agadic conversations of a whole variety of topics. Most recently, a series of teachings that were brought in the name of Ch6 about the virtue of Torah study and how to study Torah and how to help one another, the power of a mitzvah, and so on and so forth. We spoke yesterday about how you got to be kind in your home to the point where you don't want to have a kelev ra, a scary dog that might cause people collecting to be deterred from soliciting donations. We also spoke about a perplexing text in Kohelet. Is it good to sin, to mess around in your youth or not? And that's one of the challenges that the sages had with the text of Kohelet, until ultimately we explained that the Yetzer Hara tries to tell you to mess around, and your Yetzer Tov says, whatever you're going to do now is going to cost you later. Probably similar, although not entirely the same, to a person who desires to be more slim and healthy. Every item that you eat that is not in accordance to the diet will cost at some point in life. And that was the crux of our studies yesterday. We're now going to resume the Gemara's analysis of the item by item listed in the Mishnah. And we're at the point of the Mishnah where we leave weaponry, articles of war, and we're now going to go back to women's apparel, and to see which items may and which items may not be worn on Shabbos. So get ready. Hi Nechama, you want to say hi to everybody? You want to come say hi, Nechama? All right. We're going to hear I don't know if we're going to see her, but we're going to hear a visitor in the studio at this moment. All right, here goes the Mishnah. Biris Tahira. You know what? Let's open the Mishnah just so we can refer back to it. All right, almost there. No, next Mishnah. Here. Hope no one's getting dizzy. Here. Almost there. There we go. All right. Here is the text of the Mishnah. Biris, a garter, something that is used to hold the garment on their legs in place. Tahira, does not become ritually impure, and one may wear it on Shabbos. Again, this is the text of the Mishnah we're going to be analyzing in a moment. Kavalim, ankle chains, Timeim, Shabbos. These are items that can become ritually impure, and one is also restricted from wearing them on Shabbos. The Gemara is going to discuss all of this, so let's take a look. Biris Tahira. So this item, the garter, is Tahar. Rabbi Yehuda says, what is a biris? I mean, Rabbi Steindl told us it's a garter, but he wants to know, what is a biris? Biris zu etz ada. This is a kind of bracelet worn on the arm, as Rashi says, etz ada shel zeraya. This is an item, a bracelet of sorts, that is worn on the arm. That's not going to be the final accepted answer, but that is Rabbi Yehuda's proposal. Master Rabbi Yosef says, your interpretation cannot be accurate. He challenges. How would he challenge this translation? Because our Mishnah says, Biris Tahira, you're allowed to, a biris, this item that the Gemara is trying to figure out that we're translating as a garter, is pure, meaning it can't become impure, Shabbos, and you're allowed to wear it on Shabbos, ilu etzada tmeyahi. It can't be an etzada. Etzada, which is a bracelet on the arm, we know can become ritually impure. How do we know it can become ritually impure? Well, those that are a little more familiar with the biblical language of the Torah might be familiar with a narrative we read not that long ago in the Chumash, in the Torah. I believe in Chukas or in Matas. And now I'm drawing a blank. But anyways, Rashi points this out. Ilu etzada tmeyahi. How do I know that an etzada, a bracelet, is ritually capable of becoming ritually impure? Because there's a Maisa Midyan. There's the story of the Matas. There is the story of the battle against the Midianites. And they brought back a lot of stuff, items that needed to be purified. And in the story of Midian, it says, Etzada Vitsamid, they brought back a whole bunch of different items of jewelry. And then it says, Tischato Atem Ushvichem. The warriors should purify themselves, and the stuff they took in battle, the spoils of battle should be purified. If etzada is on a list of items that need to become purified, that is a strong indication that biblically this etzada is timeya, can become impure. If etzada can become impure and a biris cannot, well, they cannot be the very same item. That's some simple Talmudic logic. Of course, we're always going to hold up the Torah as the highest authority on a topic. And so, there's a long Taisus, but we'll take a look maybe at another point. So the Gemara says, okay, let's just slightly revise what Rabbi Yehuda is saying. He wasn't wrong, but we need to understand what he intended to say. Haki kamar, biris tachas etzada oimedes. A biris is just about where a bracelet is positioned. What does that mean? Let's read Rabbi Steinsaltz. A garter is on the leg in a similar place where a bracelet is on the arm. So a bracelet would be around the wrist, let's say. Well, in etzada, a biris rather goes on the leg to hold the stocking in place, just as a bracelet goes around the arm. However, unlike a bracelet, a garter cannot become ritually impure because it is not an ornament that simply holds up the stocking. So apparently, in Mishnaic times, there was a whole bunch of different accessories that were commonly found in the Ezras Nashim. One of them would be a bracelet. Apparently, that was a common part of women's apparel, wardrobe, and jewelry. And they also would have something that would hold the garments on their legs in place so that it wouldn't slip up. The thing that's there to hold a garment in place is not an ornament. A bracelet, which is all for appearance, is an ornament. That's the point that Rabbi Steinsaltz makes, and Rashi makes the same point. This was an item to ensure modesty while you're running a marathon. So they might have not had pants in those days. So you needed something to keep your leggings, or that which is around your legs in position. It wasn't considered a vessel. It wasn't considered an ornament. It was an accessory that's there to facilitate your clothing. And therefore, you're allowed to wear it because it services your wardrobe. And it's not impure because it's not an ornament and it's not a vessel. So now, let's just so that we're clear. When Rabbi Yehuda says birazu etzada, what he means is that they are in similar locations. Maybe it's even fashioned similarly, but it has a very different function, and therefore the halacha can be distinct between the bracelet on the arm, and the viris, the kind of bracelet-like item that was there to hold one's garments in position on the leg. Yosef, Ravin, Rav Huna, Kamed, Rav Yirmiyah. Once you had Ravin and Rav Huna sitting before the great Rav Yirmiyah. The Yosef, Rav Yirmiyah, v'kol menamnem, and the great Rebbe was dozing off. Is it a crime to doze off? No.
May I ask a question, Rebbe?
Yes, please.
It might be related to some to the ways how they wore clothing at those times, but it seems to me that the equivalence of garter and the bracelet is questionable, at least how I understand what a garter is. That is, a garter is at the top of the leg, holding the stocking in place, and hence it is not visible to others. And the bracelet is on the wrist, that is, it is highly visible.
You're making a very good point. I'll be very honest. My sense of reading the Gemara is that although Rabbi Steinsaltz is translating it as a garter, I don't think it is exactly identical to what today might be sold in the store or on the internet as a garter. It sounds like it was a kind of accessory that was clasped at the edge of one's garments to keep them in position. So we're calling it a garter, but I think it's not exactly an identical item, although conceptually, I suppose there is something in common. So it seems like it may have been visible, but that was not its primary purpose. Its primary purpose was to secure the garments. Your question is a good one, and I'm not entirely well versed enough on the nuanced distinction of different kinds of garters to give a strong opinion, but that's what I understand from here. I'll tell you the truth. Had I not had Rabbi Steinsaltz open in front of me, I probably would not have used the word garter. I probably would have called it a kind of clasp that goes at the edge of on one's leg to keep the garments in position. I probably wouldn't have had such a tight word to use. That's not what would have come to my mind. But Rabbi Steinsaltz is worthy of relying on. So if he chooses to give that word, I'm happy to use it. But your question,
Rabbi,
yes.
Is our problem the item or where on the body it's worn?
Our problem is we want to understand the halacha of each item. And so when we have a statement, we have two statements that seem to be contradictory. Our Gemara endeavors to clarify why they're not a contradiction. And so being that Rabbi Yehuda says that a biris is an etzada, the biris, the item that's listed in the Mishnah, you want to say hi to everybody? Is an etzada, but we know the halacha of that etzada is in conflict and contrast very deeply with. You want to come out? You want to click in or click out? Being that they have two different halachas, the Gemara needs to clarify. And so what the Gemara ends up clarifying, and again, unlike, and as the professor pointed out, unlike our modern day garter versus bracelet, which no one would ever imagine that they are almost identical, because they are very much not. But in the time of the Mishnah, it seems like conceptually they're very similar. One goes on one limb, one goes on another limb. And they may have even been designed of similar material, and the clasp might have worked in a similar way. The distinction, which is major, is its function. On one's arm, it was meant to be ornamental, observable, and for looks. And on the leg, it was meant to have a function. And again, it probably also goes into the concept, the style of the day, the concept of modesty and the odds of skin in the leg area showing versus the arm. A lot of things that are different now and then.
The reason that I ask is there is, I remember my grandfather, a kind of garter that held his shirt sleeves up that he wore around his arm. Maybe there was a female version of that. Anyway.
Yeah. So that's the interesting question, or not. Could there be something akin to what we're describing here that would also have a similar halacha? That's a good question. When we finish this Gemara, Bli Neder, let's take a peek in the Shulchan Aruch, and let's see if the Shulchan Aruch explicitly makes the connection between what we're discussing here and what you're proposing. Could it work for men? Maybe in those days men didn't have such an item, but maybe today men would. And conversely, today very few women, if any, use an item like this for this very precise purpose, to my knowledge. And so it's and this is a common challenge that we have throughout this segment of the Gemara, which is that we're talking about clothing, and admittedly the styles of what people wear has evolved just slightly over the past 2,500 years or so. And so it takes a little bit of creativity and scholarship to apply these concepts to modern wardrobe choices. So that's a very good question and a good point.
I have a question.
Go ahead. Balin.
These days, men wear elastics around their waist with a key hanging on it.
Let's not go there right now because it's at least somewhat of a different topic. It's a good topic. We will address it, but let's avoid it now because it's going to entail me weighing on something that I'm not freshly reviewed, and because it's not immediately connected to the subject, and I'd rather give you a thoroughly researched and well presented analysis. But if we don't end up covering it by the time we end Ch6 Shabbos, I'll owe you an hour presentation on it. Bli neder, or 40-minute presentation. So we'll get to it. Shkoyach for asking.
Certify that by sending me an email.
Okay, bli neder. All right, let's see this story. Yosef, Rav, and Rav Huna kamed Rav Yirmiyah. These two rabbis, Rav and Rav Huna, were sitting in the presence of Rav Yirmiyah, and Rav Yirmiyah was dozing off. He was dremeling. The Yosef, Rav, and Amar. So what do you think they were doing? They were talking Torah. And so Ravin was discussing these halachas, and he says, Biris ba'achas kavolim b'shtayim. So our Mishnah mentions two items, a biris and kavolim. Biris we translated as a garter in the Mishnah, and kavolim we translated then as like a chain that's worn on the ankle. When you tell me the word kavolim, I think the kind of thing that you put on a prisoner's leg. Clearly, that's not what we're talking about here, but it's a kind of ankle chain or an ankle clasp, and we're going to see in a moment why they would wear it. And believe me, you'll have some interesting thoughts for that too. But let's take a look. He said, "Biris ba'achas kavolim b'shtayim." Here is a rule: biris only happens on one leg, and kavolim are worn on both legs.
Thank you.
Rashi, biris achas mishoikeha, only on one of the legs or thigh or wherever exactly we're going to be securing the garments. Amalei Rav Huna, who's his friend, says, no, elu ve'elu b'shtayim, both this garter of sorts and the ankle chains, when worn, fashion calls for them to be worn on both legs. Umatilin shalsheles beinayim v'nasu kavolim. In truth, one has a garter on both legs, and if you put a chain to tie the two, to attach the two, then they become kavolim. Let's read Rabbi Steinsaltz just to make sure that we got that clear. The garter and these ankle chains are both one on two legs. If she wears a garter on both legs and then puts a chain between together, then they become ankle chains. Okay, Rabbi Steinsaltz concurs. So this is the conversation. Ravin says a garter on one leg, kavolim on two. Rav Huna says no way, it's worn on two, and as a matter of fact, the ankle chains and the biris are actually very similar. The only difference is when there's a chain between the two, it has another legal or technical word for it. So Ravin says, hold on, Rav Huna. I hear what you're saying, that you can upgrade or revise the status of an item by putting a chain. Because let's look back to the Mishnah for a moment. Biris you can wear, kavolim you can't wear. A biris is ritually safe from impurity. Kavolim are ritually vulnerable to impurity. And Rav Huna just made the case that all that you need to do to turn biris into kavolim is add a little chain in between. So Ravin asks, Shalsheles, Shaboy, Mashvile Lamana, just adding a little chain can totally change the halachic status of an item? And Rabbi Steinsaltz elaborates, if a garter without a chain is not a vessel, why would the chain just adding a chain turn it into a new kind of item that can be ritually impure? And that's a good question. It doesn't really make sense. It would be more reasonable.
Rabbi Yirmiyah was still dozing.
Let's see. You'll see. We'll find out what Rabbi Yirmiyah has to say in a moment. And then he goes on and says, maybe Ravuna, this would be, the use of the chain would be like what Rav Shmuel bar Nachmani proposed. Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Shmuel bar Nachmani had taught, quoting Rabbi Yochanan. How do I know that if there's a kind of vessel that makes noise, that can become ritually impure? In the same verse that we spoke before that talks about how to purify kalim, it says anything that comes from fire has to be purified with fire. By the way, this may be familiar because we've used this before. And we said, afilu dibur b'mashma, kol davar, even a noise-making item also could need to be ritually purified. Bishlam hasam, that would make sense in other scenarios. Why? Kabola l'kala. Sometimes you might make a chain to make noise. V'ka'avid masa, and then when you're using it, you're doing something. Hachamai masa kavod. But what is the function of these chains that are attaching both birises to be turned into kavalim? Again, maybe this is a little bit of a complicated conversation, but basically, Ravin is challenging his friend. Rav Huna says you put a chain and it gets a new name, and it has new halachas. He says, no, it doesn't make sense, because what really is the chain doing? All right, get ready. In truth, it does have a function. Rabba bar Bar Chana quoted Rabbi Yochanan as sharing the following. There was a family in Jerusalem, they used to take large strides, and it would impact their hymen. And therefore they would be perceived to not be besulais, to not be unmarried. And at that time, in that society, that was potentially something that the women did not want to have encounter. And so they chose to place chains to restrict their strides. They put a chain which restricted their strides. Now we could make this a little more comfortable and say that at a certain point in human history, it was considered dignified to take smaller steps. And so they had this chain to make sure that their steps would be more ladylike. Now, you're not going to find me here embracing that we should be telling anyone how to take their strides, but they chose themselves in that time, in that place, to regulate and to want to have a certain kind of stride. And so this chain was used to affect that. And they no longer took these large strides. And they didn't have all of these societal struggle that could happen if they were taking wide steps. Itar Behu Rabbi Yirmiyah heard this conversation. He woke up and Amrlu, and he said, Yasher, this is an accurate description. And that indeed is what Rabbi Yochanan said. So again, what was the function of these chains? The chains did have a function. It was meant to restrict their stride at a time and place where there were societal conventions about how a person should walk. Then this chain was there to affect that a person would walk in accordance to that way. So one could imagine that they're trying to train their children to have a certain mannerism, and they might have used these chains. Again, today, I don't believe this is a practice, and that's quite all right. But in this time, in this place, that was considered important, and therefore it had a function for that society.
I'm impressed what woke Rabbi Yochanan up.
All right.
We'll leave it at that.
Okay, so that concludes the discussion for now about the biris and the kavolim. It sounds like the Gemara is embracing the following. A biris is something used to hold the clothing, secure the clothing in position. Kavolim is when a chain is attached for the purpose of regulating the gait or strides that a person would take. That is the function, and that was worn. By the way, I want to just tell you something. The Rambam, quoting the Gemara, says that a Talmud Chacham, a person that is aspiring to live in and present Torah and to study Torah and to present themselves as a man of Torah, well, they have to behave with all different kinds of etiquettes. And there's all different kinds of things that are proposed. How a person's posture should be, where they should be directing their gaze, the size of their steps. And so it seems like, until this day, I think there's certain mannerisms that a person that goes to a certain schools that train people in etiquette, they might be also trained about certain kind of posture and gait and how to purport and present oneself and how to eat. And so it's not like it's something new, but what we're talking about, obviously, there's been some slight
Rabbi
development over the course of time. Yes, Rabbi Beryl?
We have here references to women, but some of these things today men wear. So would we need a separate halacha for a man wearing a bracelet, or would we say this applies to everybody?
So you may recall that in the discussion of jewelry, we've already had a number of times where the discussion has been, does this extend to men and women alike, and does it not? And it's not entirely obvious, or it's not entirely clear always. And but generally speaking, many of these principles are applied across gender. The structure of our Mishnah is listing and enumerating prevailing style and apparel that were divided by gender. So many of these items can be applied the same halacha across the gender, but under certain circumstances, that's not always obvious, and that's why the codifiers and the Rishonim who analyze the Gemara many times discuss at length that question. And Bli Neder Beryl, as I told you, we'll try to take a sneak peek into the Shulchan Aruch and see how the Shulchan Aruch codifies this very item. Dr. Hammer, you're muted. We'd love to hear your voice.
Going back a bit, it was mentioned that the garter's function was to keep up stockings, but it was also mentioned that it was only worn on one leg. Could you explain that?
So I believe that position is rejected. I believe that position is rejected. I cannot tell you, although when I was reviewing this a while back, I recall discussion that said basically that if you wore it on, let's go back and see. Because his opinion ultimately is rejected, so there isn't a lot of analysis.
Right.
But let's see.
Bernie, if it's worn as an accessory, maybe it was worn as like a bracelet only on one leg.
No, but it was sort of hidden.
It didn't have to be functional.
It wasn't.
I'm taking a fast glance at the Rashba.
Yeah.
It seems like Ravin had a different understanding of the whole subject. According to the Rashba, Ravin believes that a biris was on one leg and it was actually a piece of jewelry.
Oh, okay.
When the same biris was worn on two legs, then it became a utility for the garments. So that was Ravin's understanding of the subject. And Ravin might find us sympathetic of his position, but ultimately that's how he understands it. Because if it's only on one leg, then clearly then it is only for appearance. Because if it's there to secure your clothing, you need to have it on both legs.
We're back to functionality.
Right, exactly. But so again, based on the Rashba's interpretation, that seems to be what Ravin is saying. I'm not certain that everybody sees it that way, but you're right. If it's only on one leg, most likely the function is going to be somewhat different than if you have it on two legs. And so, Doctor, I want to thank you for recalling that and allowing us to at least briefly figure that out. Let me just see one more thing over here. All right. Okay. So that's that. I think we'll the Rashba gives us a way to settle this question, and it's a good one. We're now going to take a slight detour from the discussion of biris and kavalim, the subject of this garter and these foot handcuffs or whatever you want to call it. By the way, I saw an interpretation. I've explained it based on the explanation that I see in the Rabbi Steinsaltz and Rashi, that it was meant to to shorten a person's strides. And I saw elsewhere that the purpose was not to shorten this stride, or it was to shorten this stride, but not by shortening the stride. The chain would cause them to trip, and then that would be a reminder. I guess it's the same thing. It's just a little bit more horrific, but they would fall, and that would be a reminder to them that they should take smaller steps and not fall. Anyways, that is what I saw somewhere. Let's see this Gemara. So Rav Dimi, as you may recall, was one of the travelers between the communities of Babel, or he traveled from Babel, from Eretz Yisrael to Babel. And so when he arrived to Babel, from Eretz Yisrael, he quoted the great sage of Babel, of Eretz Yisrael, Rabbi Yochanan, who said as follows. Again, this is discussing the laws of Tuma and Tahara for certain other garments. Minayim la'arig kol shehu shutame. How do you know that material of any size can hypothetically become ritually impure? Made tzitz. It can be inferred from the tzitz. What is the tzitz? So the tzitz is a famous accessory, not accessory. It's famously one of the holy articles that was worn by the kohen gadol, by the high priest, and on it famously it would say kodesh laHashem. And so Rav Dimi says, because the tzitz is pretty small and it's considered a keli, from here we can infer that any woven garment can become impure. Rashi, mitzitz shu davar muat u'menoi im tachshite kohen, because it was pretty small, and it's enumerated among the garments of the kohen. Tosfos asks a good question, but that also I think we won't go there now. His question is, didn't we discuss earlier in our Masechta, and I'm sure you remember this, that a garment has to be, or actually maybe it was in Brachos, a garment to be impure, ritually impure needs to be 3 tefachim or 3 etzbais. There were other measurements, not kol shehu. So Tosfos addresses that. But let's see our Gemara. Amarli Abaye says, hold on. Stop the presses. It sits. Arughu is the tzitz, the golden headband that was worn by the kohen gadol, front plate. Was it woven? It wasn't woven. The Tanya tzitz kimintas shel zohav. The tzitz, the item worn by the kohen on his forehead, was made out of a piece of gold, a plate of gold. And the Brisa continues. You know what the size of the tzitz, the dimensions of this golden, what do we usually call it, tzitz? No, it's on the head. It's not a headband. Head plate, okay. Again, head plate doesn't really give you much context either, but let's see the dimensions as the Brises. So the kohen's head plate, the thing that the kohen wears on his forehead, part of the holy kohen's 8 garments, well, it was pretty small. The roichev shtei etzbais. The width was the size of 2 finger breadths, pretty small. Umukaf me'oizen la'oizen, and it wrapped from ear to ear. The kas of olav shtei shitin, and on it was written on 2 lines, Yud and Hey, which is a reference to Hashem's name, Lemaila. The Kodesh Lamed Lemata, and on a line underneath it, it said Kodesh La, holy to. So famously, again, the Kohen's tzitz, the plate of gold that went on his forehead, said Kodesh La Hashem, holy to Hashem, but not the way you would imagine it to be written. Rather, it was a little bit opposite. The word Hashem was on top, and underneath it said Kodesh Lamed. Rashi, just let's clarify. Rashi says, Hashem Shalom B'Shita Al-Gaina. The name of Hashem in its entirety is listed on top. Kodesh La B'Shita Tachtaina. The lower line said Kodesh La. Shaloi Lahaktim Shar Oisis Lamala Ben Hashem, because we didn't want any other letter to go on top of or to precede Hashem's name. Hashem's name has to be most prominent. Because it was in 2 lines. Rabbeinu Halevi Shoina Kodesh LaHashem El Mata V'Hihi. Rabbeinu Halevi said that it said Kodesh LaHashem El Mata, and this is really the very same description, just using different words. So this is Rashi's explanation. I'm not understanding exactly Tosfos's trouble over here. All right, hold on. All All right, I want to show you a picture. Just give me a second from the Steinsaltz Gemara, which adds, I believe, what I said, I don't understand what Tosfos is saying, but I believe this picture clarifies what Tosfos is saying. So if you'll indulge me just for a moment, I want to put it up on the screen. Hold on. Okay. Thank you for your patience. Let's get this picture on the screen. Pronto. Loading. Open. All right, here we go. So look what it has over here. It's a little blurry. But if you see, Hashem is big and prominent and higher up, but it has Kodesh Le below it, but it could read in one line. And so it seems like Tosfos, this is what Tosfos seems to be saying. And this kind of makes sense. Whereas what Rashi proposed, again, I hope it's not too blurry, I hope you can see it. Rashi proposes that this word, Kodesh Le, was underneath the letters Yud K Vav K. And that would just read a little funny, but ultimately would allow us to put Hashem's name on top. So Tosfos, this is Tosfos' explanation. So there you have it. All right, let's see the Gemara a little further. It's going to keep on being interesting. Something interesting. Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yossi commented about the tzitz, about the kohen's head plate, headband that we're talking here. Ani ra'isi b'roimi. I was in Rome, and I actually saw the Kohen Gadol's tzitz, because of Olav Kodesh Lashem, B'shita Achas, and the words Kodesh Lashem was actually on one line, unlike the way the Brisa describes the Kohen Gadol's.
Rabbi, if you look at the picture that you posted,
Yes.
it could look like one line with Hashem's name in bigger letters.
Correct.
And it's spaced that way.
Correct, because what I was showing you is the opinion of Tosfos, which tries to make this make a little more, to be a little bit more verstandig, to make a little more sense. Let me just show you this next picture. If we can swap it around. I don't know if they'll let me here. Edit. Let's see if they'll allow me to rotate it. Here. Oh, come on. There we go. All right, so look, Rashi, this is Rashi's opinion right over here. You see, I know it's a little small. Can we zoom in? Here, let's see if we can zoom in. I'm not used to this program, so okay, we can. Here. So this is Rashi. Hashem, Kodesh, La. So that reads a little bit difficult. That's the conventional way of reading it. Rashi, this apparently is the second opinion that Rashi is quoting. La Hashem Kodesh. It doesn't say Kodesh La Hashem, but it could make more sense to write it like that. This seems to be what Tosfos is saying. Right? Kodesh La Hashem. So Hashem is on top, but it still can kind of read like that. then this is another opinion which we haven't discussed right now. So anyways, there's different ways of reading it. But bottom line, and Rebero, you make a good point, but that's not what it seems to be saying over here. Rabbi Lazar says, I saw it and it was all on one line. Rashi, what's the story? We got to take a look at the story. So hold on a second. This is a story we need to see. Here we go. All right, I guess this is not the right text. But anyways, let's take a look over here. No, why is it? No. All right, anyways, the story was that a number of holy sages traveled to Rome. This is during the Hadrianic series of decrees. And so Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yossi, and the others traveled as a delegation to Rome to appeal to the Roman, I don't know if it was to the Senate or to the other people that were making these decisions to repeal some of the decrees. The Chachamim weren't inclined, the Romans weren't inclined to accept the rabbi's appeal, but miraculously, I think it was Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, ends up providing a remedy for the emperor's daughter who was crazy. She was hit by some kind of insanity. And because of that, the Romans were more inclined to act favorably, and ultimately it works out. They then requested to see the treasures of the Roman treasury. And in there were a number of items that the Romans pillaged from Eretz Yisrael. And so what's happening here is they had the opportunity to see items that were from Yerushalayim. And so they were able to see this. Just by the way, there's a lot of discussion in Jewish scholarship about what to do if and when there is a contradiction between the tradition that Chachamim have and archaeological finds. I'm not going to give you the whole shir at this point. Suffice it to say that obviously it's a big question because there are occasions where relics that are found from the time of the Bayis Sheni, the Beis Hamikdash, might differ. Many times they confirm, but sometimes there seems to be some kind of difference between what our tradition has it and what archaeology or other kinds of finds have. And so the question then becomes, what do you do about this apparent conflict? And this passage of the Gemara, this fact of the Gemara, among others, gives a little bit of perspective, because what happens is the oral tradition has a certain Masorah. Shalom, that's for us? There's a truck outside? There's a certain Masorah about how the tzitz looked. And then Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Yossi was actually in Rome, and he saw this thing. And so how do you navigate? How do you manage this question? And so there's plenty of discussion. One of the explanations, if I'm not mistaken, about this question, and of course now I'm not recalling the source where I saw this, is that it's possible that there were multiple shitot about how it should be designed, and so there may have been different iterations even in the time of the Beis Hamikdash. But suffice it to say, it is an interesting topic. I'll just add one more thing. I believe it's the Ramban. The Ramban, we know, in the end of his lifetime, traveled to Eretz Yisrael. And the Ramban had a certain opinion about the weight of a shekel. And in his work, if I recall correctly, he writes that when I arrived to Eretz Yisrael, and the Jewish people of the community presented me with an ancient shekel HaKodesh, he weighed it. And in that instance, he revised his sheet, if I recall correctly, on the measurements of the shekel HaKodesh based on that discovery. So suffice it to say, it is an interesting question. And I'll just add one more thing. There's a big question about the menorah, how the menorah was shaped. Was it circular or was it straight? Famously, the Rambam, and based on the Gemara, describes that the arms of the menorah were ba'alachsan, were straight. And the question becomes that we conventionally portray the menorah with round branches. And there are also a number of other places where we find the arms drawn circular, most famously on the Arch of Titus in Rome. And many Jews go there, and Jews don't go under, do go under there. And it was a triumph of Titus after destroying the Beis Hamikdash, and he portrays the way that they carted away many holy relics from the Beis Hamikdash, and in addition to a large television camera, right? They portrayed the menorah there with round branches, and so the Rebbe discussed this once, and the Rebbe discussed the contradiction, and the Rebbe was of the opinion that based on the Gemara, based on Chazal, and based on the Rambam, that the menorah was angular, not rounded. So what do you do with the Arch Atidus? So he says a few things. First of all, the Jewish people had a number of lamps in the Beis Hamikdash. In addition to the menorah, they had other lamps illuminating the whole Beis Hamikdash. So it's the whole area. It's possible that this wasn't a menorah, but not the menorah. It's also possible that it's possible that they didn't receive the menorah, or they applied their own artistic license. And so that alone was not perturbing to the Rebbe to want to revise his understanding of the subject based on the Gemara and the Rambam. Let's just see if we can find a picture. Oh. So this is the picture that I believe is on the Titus's triumphant arch. And here you see, when I was in Rome, we looked at this, although you really have to, and so you see it's circular. And this is, by the way, the television camera that I was referring to. This is how we know that there's time travel, right? There was someone there.
Is that the Ch6?
No, I don't know what that is, but it's obviously not a video camera. But there you have it. This is meant to portray other holy kelim. Great tragedy. Again, we're still in Av, and we're before Tu B'Av, in the days that we commemorate the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. But this is always a perplexing image and a very sad image to see the triumph of our enemies carting away our holy menorah and holy items. Now, many people wonder if the menorah is still in Rome. And I think the prevailing opinion is that it was probably melted down for its gold when Rome was sacked. And so unfortunately, the odds are not in favor of these items still existing in Rome, but we can always hope and dream and imagine. And the main thing is that we should be zocheh for the arrival of Mashiach, and Eliyahu Navi will come, and when we want to reconstruct the menorah, we'll ask him to give us the precise dimensions, and I'm sure we'll get it right and we won't go wrong. So maybe speedily nowadays, but that's as far as the menorah is concerned, and that's on the subject of if the record seems to be in contradiction to, in conflict to what we understand from this kind of evidence. So, but here's the problem. Remember the question? Rav Dimi tried to say that we can infer from the tzitz that woven material can become ritually impure. But we just brought a lengthy text, which we took a long detour, which ultimately describes the tzitz as a piece of solid gold metal, not woven. So here is actually what happened. When Rav Dimi came to Narda, Shalach lahu, he sent out the following message: Dvarim shamarti lachem ta'os heim biyadi. My comment, equating the tzitz to woven material was a mistake. Rashi, Chazar b'mi masha amar tzitz argu. It seems like Rav Dimi was initially of the opinion that the tzitz was a woven item. Maybe it was woven golden threads. As we know, in the clothing of the Kohanim, there was plenty of use of golden thread. And so it seems like Rav Dimi initially thought that tzitz was a woven item. And it actually makes sense. If you wanted to really press against the forehead, it would probably be more malleable if it was a woven, a kind of fabric of golden threads as opposed to a metal plate. But anyways, that's what he said. I made a mistake. And by the way, I think this is a very profound lesson before we see what he says, that he was willing to own up to a mistake and to put it out and be public about it. I think that itself is a lesson in humility and the ability to change course if one made a mistake. Biram, but I have to be clear. Kach Amir Mishum Rabbi Yochanan. Here's really what my tradition was in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. How do I know that an adornment of a very small size is impure? That we can learn mitzitz, from a tzitz. Because the tzitz was very small, it's a tachshit, and it is able to become ritually impure. How do I know that a woven item of any measurement can become impure? Obviously not the tzitz. The tzitz was not woven. I inferred from the verse, Oy beged. What's the verse that says Oy beged? Let's open it up. 32. L'chol asher yipol olav mehem. Anything that falls, v'moisam, when the dead animal that's a sheretz is impure, yitma, mikol kliyet, it touches any vessel made out of wood, oy beged, or any garment. So the words oy beged teach us any size material that's woven can become ritually impure. All right, Taner Rabbanan, let's just see really fast, and then I think we'll close with this line. We have a brisa that says, Arik kol shehu, something that's woven of any size, Tome, it's impure, can become impure. V'tachshet kol shehu, any size adornment, Tome, can become impure. So the smallest earring, nose ring, or ring, it's smaller than the common dimensions of something that can become impure. It can become impure. Arig v'tachshet kol shehu, anything that's woven, anything that's of a tachshet. If it's a woven ornament, it's impure. Musav sak al beged shetami mishum arig. Now, if you take, let's see, Rashi, Moisif, it's Rashi's version, that a sak, which is something woven, also can become impure if it's woven. And Rashi points out, and it's a perplexing comment that the Gemara is going to analyze. So I think we'll stop here. Let's just do one more thing if we can. Let's go right up to the beginning of our Gemara today. Just to remind you, today's Gemara, we started with a new item, a biris, which we said was a garter, and we discussed what it is and if it's impure and why it's different than a bracelet. And we said clearly it is different than a bracelet, it had a different function. We had a whole machlokes of two rabbis in front of their teacher who was dremeling. And then we talked about the menorah. So now I just want to take a look real fast if we can find if the Shulchan Aruch is linked over here, and if it is, we can take a peek. If not, we'll have to find it for you. No, I'm gonna have to look that up to you. Look that up for you.
So, Rabbi,
yes,
I find it difficult that they use the word beged meaning any piece, any size, because beged implies a whole beged, a whole something to wear.
The word oy beged, for whatever reason, he understands to be talking about any, because of oy, it sounds like a very open-ended, any kind of material. Beged we understand as a garment, but it also could mean material that's used in garments. Hang on, I think we found it. Let's take a look. All right, this needs a little more attention than we can do right now. Long story short, it sounds like this. A bracelet can be worn, and if it's used to hold up the clothing, it can be worn. So the Rambam quotes our Gemara just about verbatim, saying that you can use both of these items. The only issue that was discussion in our Gemara is about the laws of purity and impurity, which is not really a big issue in 2021. So my dear friends, that's today's Gemara. Varied, a little different than what we've been studying the past few days. I hope you found it interesting. I'm grateful you joined. Again, Mazel Tov, Beryl for Rosalie's his grandson or great-grandson? Grandson. Mazel Tov. The family should have only nachas and gesund, and we should only have good news for everyone. Let's also mention Mazel Bas Esther David. That's Dr. Harosh's sister. We're presently doing the Shiva, and I just want to remind everyone that tonight we're going to do davening at Yosef's house. But if anyone's really feeling up to a late night snack at around 8:30 or so after the minyan at Yosef, we're going to have a late night yeshiva night, rabbis and ribeyes, a little learning and a little steak, and everyone is invited to join if you should so desire. We're going to end this discussion and I invite you to jump back on to study Chumash with Rabbi Shalom Ber, and to join us tomorrow, same time, same link, Ezer Hashem. And Rabbi Shalom Ber, you'll notify about the Chumash. You let them know about for. Okay, fine. Okay, very good. All right, have a great day. Yashar Koyach all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure.